the inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. Even though the congressional district on the western side of Hamilton County has been dominated by two men, Democrat Tom Luken for 7 terms between 1976 and 1990, and Republican Steve Chabot for 9 terms from 1994 to 2008, again from 2010 to the present, it has frequently been a competitive district. But with the redistricting based on the 2010 census, adding all of Warren County, the 1st District is now heavily Republican, making the race for a Democrat very challenging. I am joined this morning by the candidates for the Ohio 1st Congressional District. Steve Chabot, the incumbent Republican, has been a fixture in local politics, having served in the Cincinnati City Council and Hamilton County Commission before being elected to Congress as part of the Gingrich Revolution in 1994. And Fred Kundrata, a Democrat making his first run for political office. Mr. Kundrata is a pilot, was a pilot in the Air Force and is a veteran of the Gulf War. He also served in Operation Enduring Freedom in Bosnia-Herzegovina. He has flown as a commercial pilot for 16 years. He is also an attorney. Steve, Fred, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you, Dan.
Let's start out with a question about an issue that is local, but it has national implications. Steve, the Brent Spence Bridge is a major concern for all of us in this area, and then really for the nation because of the corridor. Realistically, what's the role the federal government can play in modernizing that bridge, creating a new bridge to supplement the existing bridge?
Well, there clearly is a federal role, although it's a state project. You've got the Kentucky Department of Transportation, ODOT, the Ohio Department of Transportation, the City of Cincinnati, and others involved. But there is a federal role. Rob Portman and Sherrod Brown, and so you have Republicans and Democrats who, in the past, and myself, Ken Lucas, we've worked together on this. We've gotten over the years, as of this point, $53 million, but it's going to take a lot more than that to do this. Tolls are obviously
about $2.8 billion.
Yeah, it's a lot of money that it's going to take, and tolls are one of those issues that are ultimately going to have to be decided. Thus far, Ohio has said they would consider it. Kentucky has said no, but it's structurally obsolete. It was built to have 70,000 cars, and it has 150,000 cars, so it has to happen.
But realistically, can the federal government make this happen? Are the resources there any longer for the federal government to invest in that kind of infrastructure?
The federal government plays a role, but it's not going to pay for the entire funding of this bridge because there are bridges, we're very familiar with this locally.
The majority.
It looks like it may very well not be the majority of that funding. Some of us have been hopeful early on. But I'd also say that the longer that this drags out, the more expensive it's going to get. So we need to get it done. It's a critical infrastructure improvement that needs to be made. It affects us in so many ways here locally. It has to happen.
Fred, this is not only the bridge question, but it's a question of the capacity of the federal government. And one of the things that you talk about, as I read your website, infrastructure investment. So what's your view about the role of the federal government and what it ought to be in the future on the question of this bridge and generally?
Yeah, no doubt, Dan, we do need a federal role in not only the Brent Spence, but so much of our crumbling roads and bridges throughout the 1st District and throughout Ohio and the United States. I've proposed to have a bipartisan leadership team to bring together people, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, to solve a lot of these issues. My opponent here, sitting to my right, has been rated the #1 most extreme conservative voting member of Congress by the National Journal this past spring. He's proud of that fact. I don't see him coming to the table in a bipartisan way, in a moderate fashion, to solve the problems. I've proposed how to pay for it.
How would you pay for it?
Right. Again, reaching out, as Fred Kundrata does, in a bipartisan way. I like Rand Paul's suggestion of bringing back the corporate profits from overseas. Corporations hold approximately $2 trillion in overseas banks, and right now, if they were to bring them back, it's about a 35% hit on their money. Well, they're not bringing it back. We need to solve that issue. I support Rand Paul with his 5% grace tax, and they estimate that would be about $70 billion coming back to the United States coffers, and that could be piggy banked into a fund to be used, at least as a down payment, to get the ball rolling for a long-term plan. This past summer, when they voted on the Highway Trust Fund, there was a long-term plan voted on it. It got voted down on again, party line votes, and my opponent to my right is part of the gridlocked Congress, which has a less than 15% approval rating. And it went to a short-term plan, and Wenstrup and Boehner both supported it. My opponent did not. So he doesn't have a short-term plan, doesn't have a long-term plan. He has no plan. I have a plan. I plan to bring together everybody in a bipartisan spirit to finish the job.
Steve, what do you say?
Yeah, well, I disagree with most of what he just said, but I did vote against the transportation bill, I think for good reason. It got loaded up with a lot of pork barrel spending, in my opinion. There were all kinds of smoke and mirrors, kind of the budget mechanisms that often get thrown around and the public gets taken advantage of. So I oppose a lot of the bad spending. That's why a group called Citizens Against Government Waste that keeps track of these things gave me the highest score in the country for voting against wasteful spending. And so we have to be very careful about that. That's one reason we have an $18 trillion debt almost hanging over our heads, because government has spent far too much money.
On the infrastructure question, though, especially with highways, we've funded this for decades on gasoline tax, which has declined because of mileage changes, cars getting better mileage. There's all sorts of reasons that that has dried up, and that's the source. Do we have to look for, though, on this infrastructure that we built out in the 50s and the 60s, just on a maintenance level, do we have to be willing to tax ourselves?
There is already a tax at the pump. It's 18 cents per gallon at the pump right now that we're paying.
And that's it? Or
that's what it is. That's what it is and has been. Some people, my opponent amongst them, has indicated that that the tax ought to be raised. I don't think raising taxes is the answer. I think we overspend. I think that's our problem, not that we're undertaxed in this country.
What about bringing the corporate profits back?
It's fine to bring corporate profits back to this country. I have no problem with that. But what we need to do, we now have the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world. We used to be the second highest. We were below Japan. They were the only country that had a higher corporate tax rate than we did, but they lowered their tax rate. We are now, the United States of America, the highest corporate tax rates in the entire industrialized world. We need to lower our taxes, not be raising them. I think people are overtaxed, not undertaxed.
Another way to help pay for this would be to again, this idea has been floated around, is to make Wall Street have a tax on Wall Street. I was terribly disappointed in Speaker Boehner of the Republican majority this past summer when that idea was floated about taxing corporations, financial institutions with $500 billion or more in their coffers. Speaker Boehner backed down off of that because Congressman Chabot and those in his Republican majority feel that it would have upset the Wall Street powerful elite who contribute to people like my opponent and Boehner and all the rest of the Republican majority. So they backed off a great proposal, and that was all part of Dave Camp, Representative Camp's suggestion on tax reform. And again, the Republicans did not act. I will reach out in a bipartisan manner and work with representatives like Camp to come up with a good solution on how to solve the problems of America.
Steve, your relationship to the Speaker, you have broken with him. You broke with him over the budget question last year. You've broken with him a number of times. First off, what's that say about your relationship to the leadership of the Republican Party? And secondly, what Mr. Kundrata keeps bringing up is people working together across the aisle. And I think the average person looks at Congress and says, we're really discouraged by the inability to have that happen.
Yeah, I think a lot of the criticism of Congress is well earned, but I think the main problem is in the Senate right now under Harry Reid. We have passed bill after bill in the House of Representatives, and even though it's Republican majority right now, we've had dozens and dozens of Democrats that have voted with us on a lot of these bills that the American people would agree on most of the time. They would improve the economy. Bills relative to reducing the amount of regulations on small businesses so they can expand and grow and create real jobs in the private sector, not government jobs like we're were created by the stimulus. So we pass them in the House, they go over to the Senate, and Harry Reid not only won't let these things come up for a vote, he won't even let them be debated. So President Obama has not had to veto anything, and that's what it's a dysfunctional Senate. So we should be working in a bipartisan manner.
You've opened up the question of jobs. I want to move on to a different topic here, and that is both of you, if you look at your issues page on your websites, and we'll give everybody the websites to look at later. If you look at the issues page, both of you have jobs right up at the top. One of the things that you say is that we've had a declining manufacturing base. I wonder if it's so much a declining manufacturing base or the function or the organization of manufacturing has fundamentally changed. We're still manufacturing a lot of stuff. We just don't need as many people to do it. So all of those jobs have disappeared. All those good middle class union jobs, a lot of them have disappeared. The people who get hired in manufacturing are pretty high paid because they have to run computers and whatever. But there aren't that many jobs. So what is your approach for both of you, but let's start over here, what's your approach to creating good jobs in this economy?
Well, a number of facets there, Dan. One, rebuilding Ohio's infrastructure with a plan to pay for it like I have, working with people like Senator Rand Paul and or Dave Camp to bring together a good comprehensive package to help pay for something like that. And again, the Republicans shot it down because they were afraid of losing support from Wall Street. Number two, I favor a rebuilding and building up our defense corridor from GE's plant in Evendale up to Wright-Patterson. I served at Wright-Pat for 5 years of my military career. I know the people up there, and I know Area B very well. And I worked at the Pentagon for 6 years, so I worked in acquisition. I know the folks up there. I've got a good friend network and contact network around the Beltway, the D.C. Beltway, on improving the job prospect here to manufacture products that feed off that defense and aerospace corridor that I envision from GE's plant in Evendale all the way up to Wright-Pat. And now we have the GE facility down the banks, so you can actually stretch that all the way down to the banks now. But to manufacture, there's always going to be a need, and we need to bring the manufacturing back. And again, tax reform that could have been done to improve the conditions for manufacturers, which was included in Dave Camp's tax reform proposal, again, was turned down by my opponent.
Jobs question.
Yeah,
good jobs.
Good job. Important. My opponent mentioned at the beginning about Wall Street money coming to Republicans and us, et cetera. If you really look at the records, you'll see that President Obama, Hillary Clinton, Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer, that's where the Wall Street money is going in tremendous amounts as opposed to Republicans.
It also goes to Republicans.
It goes there, but those folks are way above any Republicans. Now, as far as getting jobs in this country going again, there are two problems with job creation in our country principally. One is we're overregulated, small businesses especially, but larger businesses were overregulated by the federal government. It happens at the state level too and local level, but mainly at the federal level, and they're overtaxed. And as far as regulations, we need to reduce the amount of red tape and paperwork that comes out of Washington on these small businesses. And a good example of that is Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, or as a lot of people refer to it, the Unaffordable Care Act. A lot of small businesses aren't creating more jobs because they're really concerned about that. And a lot of the worst things about Obamacare haven't kicked in yet because the president has put them off beyond elections, and we need to reduce and simplify the tax code.
Okay, you brought it up. I wasn't going to get to it, but you've brought it up. You say you're opposed to it. I understand that. What's the alternative? Because there are things about that, both from the medical community side and also from the average person side who has gotten coverage for the first time. So are you going to take coverage away from the people who've gotten the coverage over the last year and a half?
There were many ways that this could have been handled, and there are some things in Obamacare which I think were good things, but overall it's really bad policy for the country.
But what's the specific plan?
Allowing folks to remain on their parents' policies through 26, that was a good idea. allowing pre-existing conditions to be covered, a good idea. But you didn't have to have essentially a federal takeover of the healthcare system, which is driving what was the best healthcare system in the world into a more mediocre healthcare coverage, and it's driving up the premiums, and the coverage that people have isn't as good as it used to be. There may be some people that have it now that didn't have it before, but there are also people in the other direction. We also should allow insurance companies to sell their products across state lines so there's more competition to bring rates down.
That's something that could be done within the current framework.
And we have actually passed modifications of the so-called Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, many times in the House, but Harry Reid, again, will not let them come up for a vote over in the Senate.
Time. What about on the health care?
Right. My opponent distorts my statements on the Affordable Care Act. He says I'm calling the Affordable Care Act fantastic, which is ridiculous because I lay out that I want to work with the problems. What I called fantastic was exactly the success stories of over 20 million people being now covered with good affordable health insurance through the ACA. And then actually our uninsured rate has fallen from roughly 18% of the American population down to about 13%. And from a public health perspective, those are great numbers, but we need to work on it. I know that...
so what are the problems that you would like to fix?
There's a lot of problems, and I agree with my opponent that there's problems that are hitting small business and business owners around the country as they need to have clarity, and with such a big piece of legislation like the ACA, there will be problems. My opponent has voted against the ACA to defund or derail it over 50 times. I'm going to be a bipartisan, moderate legislator that will go to Washington, work with the other side, work with a good team of people to fix the problems because it's here. The Supreme Court has ruled on it. It is here to stay. And my opponent really can't work on it because he implicitly supports it at that point. I support efficiencies in the ACA through, again, insurance across state lines, perhaps buying drugs across the border into Canada, providing FDA rules can be met. So there's a lot of things to work on. I look forward to my time, hopefully in Washington, if the voters elect me in, to work on the ACA to make life a lot better for people like so many women who need it, and men.
I'm out of time. I'm over time. But the House has voted again and again and again just to kill the ACA. What is your expectation? Do you expect that that will continue with the hope that the Senate will go Republican this time, and then in 2 years you'll be able to catch the White House, and that's when it will get turned back?
Well, we'll know in a little over 3 weeks how it goes, but if the Republicans take over the Senate, have to pick up 6 seats. I expect there will be probably a repeal, but that President Obama would veto.
Right.
If we can't accomplish that, then I think we should have modifications, changes that make it better. They go to President Obama. We'll see what he does. Okay. He can either look to his legacy and work with Congress to make the right changes, or he can basically be a hardline ideologue and do what he has been doing, which is not allowing anything to move forward.
Thank you very much. We've only had so much time here this morning. There's a lot more you can learn about both of these candidates. Check out their websites, stevechabot.com and kundrataforcongress.com. Thank you very much for being here. Stay tuned. Given the Affordable Care Act reform, which we've just been talking about, is local funding still necessary for the University of Cincinnati Medical Center and Cincinnati Children's Medical Center? That's what Hamilton County voters will have to decide with Issue 7. Welcome back. Issue 7 on the Hamilton County ballot, the Health and Hospitalization Levy, raises interesting questions in relation to the national health care reform process that extended medical coverage for millions of Americans. Issue 7, who's on this November's ballot, is the Health Care and Hospitalization Levy. This is a renewal of an existing levy with no increase in the rate. The difference is that this time the renewal is for 3 years, not the normal 5-year cycle. The levy would raise $37 million a year for medically indigent residents of Hamilton County treated at University of Cincinnati Medical Center and the Children's Hospital Medical Center. Set at 4.07 mils, it will cost a homeowner $51.11 for every $100,000 of valuation. I am joined this morning to discuss Issue 7 by Lee Ann Liska, the President and CEO of the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. She is also the Senior Vice President of UC Health.
Good morning.
Lee Ann, welcome.
Thank you.
3 years rather than 5. The Tax Levy Review Commission recommended this shortened cycle because why? What's the relationship to the Affordable Care Act?
Well, actually, Dan, it was 3 years last time as well.
I think they were sort of thinking it was going to be.
Yeah, and we were hoping it was going to be 5, and actually that's what we requested, but they thought it would be 3 again because we really don't know what's going to happen with the Affordable Care Act. And actually we're blessed that it's even on the ballot because, you know, there was a lot of tension. Was the Affordable Care Act actually going to obviate the need for a levy? But actually it was their independent auditors that said we're really not going to know how the Affordable Care Act is going to work out all of its nuances, so they thought 3 years, by 2017 we should have a good estimate of how many people are enrolled, and that's why they put it on for 3 years.
The UC Hospital, UC Medical Center Hospital, what most of us say University Hospital, you see the most indigent patients in the area. Lots of hospitals take in indigent patients, but you see the most.
We do.
Have you already seen some impact with more people having coverage, either because they've been able to purchase coverage through the exchanges, or because they have joined the extended Medicaid?
We have, and actually we think that that's great news. We've seen some increase in Medicaid coverage. We've also seen a slight decrease in ED utilization, which is another good mark, we think.
Wait a minute, what's that, ED?
The emergency department. My
Okay.
apologies.
No,
So
no,
both are related, we think. But yes, let's start with Medicaid coverage. So we've seen an increase in Medicaid coverage, a decrease in self-pay, meaning that more patients are enrolled. So that is good news. Not at the rate that we had hoped, but we think it's moving in the right direction. Related to the emergency department, we're seeing less patients come through the emergency department that are uninsured. That's an indication to us that hopefully patients are starting to see primary care patients or physicians in the community. We also have an amazing program in the emergency department for those patients who we call super utilizers, patients who use the emergency department a lot. We partner with a community organization called Healthcare Access Now, or HCAN. And these are caseworkers that work with these super utilizing patients and make sure that they have primary care physicians, they have prescription benefits, they have transportation, they actually go into the patient's homes to make sure that they're not accessing the emergency department inappropriately. So we actually think that our partnership with that organization is also helping.
Because just to make it clear, because the cost of a patient in an emergency room, the emergency department, is very expensive compared to treating somebody in a doctor's office or some other way, right?
Absolutely. The emergency department is the completely wrong place to receive primary care. It's also clogs it up for the patients who really do need emergent care. So we like to get those patients where they need the care, which is ideally in a primary care physician's office in the lowest cost setting.
So that's a benefit out of the Affordable Care Act.
Absolutely.
Because people are in the immediate situation. You don't know where this is going. How many patients are you dealing with a year right now? I'm sure you can project at least a year ahead. You have to do budgeting. How many patients are you dealing with and serving because of the indigent care levy, the hospital health and hospitalization levy? What does it make it possible for you to do because this levy exists?
We see about 30,000 Hamilton County residents each year who benefit by the Hamilton County levy. So that's a lot of patients who come through our doors that we are able to serve. And the levy only subsidizes a portion of that. But we're grateful for every dollar that comes from the levy to help us care for them. But it's about $50 million a year of uncompensated care that we deliver each year. Again, that's our obligation and our happy commitment to the community.
And the question I always have to ask in these situations is, what if this didn't exist? What if this failed?
Well, my concern would be that we would have many patients who would not get access to very vital services, and not even just primary care or chronic care, but services like behavioral health. Many of our indigent patients have chronic behavioral health needs. dental services, women's services, OB. So some of those other services that may not be as obvious but are poorly compensated as well, that really need to be cared for besides primary care or emergent care, that we also provide out of the levy dollars.
And we're just about out of time, but all of that, of course, impacts things like infant mortality
Absolutely.
and child poverty
Yes.
and all of that, which are very high rates
Right.
in this area.
Right.
Thank you very much, and I want to make sure people can learn a bit more from the website at healthlevy.com. And thank you for being here this morning. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Remember, all our Newsmakers interviews are online, and since Labor Day, Newsmakers has focused on issues and candidates that will be on the ballot in November. It's a great resource for preparing to cast your vote. Have a good week.